Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We were just having some technical difficulties, but everything is resolved now. So I would first like to say hello and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are doing well and getting through the second week of January. Wow, already, right? Before you know it, we'll say, oh my goodness, it's December or it's summertime. My name is Khadija Guillaume. I am a project coordinator of employment equity and career promotion with employers at Connector Canada. I'd like to welcome you all to our Know Your Employment Rights. Today is Thursday, January 13th. Joining me today, we have four incredible and knowledgeable Canadian employment lawyers who are here to discuss with you what your employment rights are when it comes to applying for job applications, job positions, why these rights matter, the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and providing tips and solutions to remove barriers to employment for racialized individuals. So I'd like to welcome our guests here today. But you guys can hear me, right? Everyone can hear me and you can see me, correct? Yep. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Just want to make sure, God forbid, I say all that and no one can see or hear me. Oh my goodness. Okay. Before we dive into our panel discussion, I'd like to take this time to acknowledge first the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of the many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you. Folks, I'm super excited here to introduce to you the panel for this conference. First up, we have Busayo A. She is a senior associate and Toronto employment lawyer at Monkhouse Law. Her area of expertise involve navigating workplace issues ranging from wrongful dismissal, constructive dismissal, human rights discrimination, contract and policy drafting, and many more. Hi, Busayo. Nice to see you. Nice to see your face. You look lovely.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you here. Next, we have Puneet Tiwari, an experienced employment litigator representing both employees and employers alike. He is involved in all aspects of human resource and employment law advice. He has represented clients in small claims court, the HR20, and the Ministry of Labor and the Superior Court of Justice. Hi, Puneet, how are you? Oh, your mic.
Sorry about that. I guess in 2022, I'm still on mute, but thanks so much for having me.
No problem at all. Hey, technology, right? Some of the things we got to deal with in this time. Next, joining us as well, we have Osaro Obaseki, an employment lawyer and associate with Samfiru Tumarkin's LLP's Labor and Employment Law Practice Group. He is serving clients across British Columbia. He focuses primarily on employee and employer rights and obligations to provide detailed insight, strong advocacy, and clear solutions for his clients. His areas of legal expertise include wrongful dismissals, human rights applications, employment contract drafting, disputes, and more. Hi, Osaro, how are you?
Morning, Khadija. Thank you for the warm welcome.
Thank you. No, I'm so glad to have you here from the other side of Canada.
Happy to be here.
And then finally, folks, we have Danielle Rawlinson. She is an associate lawyer at Monkhouse Law, who is a zealous advocate who seeks to protect her clients' interests and attain equitable results while helping them navigate the litigation process. She assists employees with navigating workplace issues ranging from wrongful dismissal, constructive dismissal, human rights discrimination, and disability insurance claims. Hello, Danielle. How are you?
Hello, I'm well. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. So glad to have you all here. So glad. Thank you all for joining me today. It's so great to have you. And I'm sure the audience is very eager to hear what you have to say, to share your knowledge, your experience, and your advice regarding today's discussion. And again, welcome everyone. So glad to have you here. Just to start off, I would like to start off with the topic of equity, diversity, and inclusion. To me, whenever I think about the difference between equity, diversity and inclusion, I like to define it as, diversity is acknowledging the variety of different people to bring to the table. And then equity is giving everyone a seat at the table. And then inclusion is finally making everyone feel welcomed to be at the table. So I would like to ask each of you what equity, diversity, and inclusion means to you, and how does your place of employment define equity, diversity, and inclusion? Puneet, may I please start with you?
Sure, no problem. Well, when I was younger, it's something I would think about that, hey, do I have to do something different? Are there rules that I didn't learn about growing up? They're talking about the cottage. What am I supposed to say? So there was a lot of that growing up, and I think now what it means to me is I can be the best me and do what I need to do without thinking about that stuff at all. Excellent. And I've been part of workplaces that don't have that kind of environment, but right now I'm working somewhere that does have that kind of environment, and really it's at where I am right now, they don't really say, hey, we're diverse, we're equitable. It's not something mentioned, but you see it. There's partners who are women in different races. There's associates of different races, and it's just everyone feels they're there because of their talent and no other reason. And I love that environment.
Of course. I definitely do agree with you. There have been times where I would feel excluded from, for example, conversations or from gatherings just because I feel like I couldn't relate to it. But, I feel like now with more awareness of inclusion, the more awareness of diversity, it's nice to work at a place where you feel welcomed, and a place of employment can really acknowledge your uniqueness that you can bring to, like I said table. So thank you for sharing that. For you, Osaro, how would you define equity, diversity, and inclusion? Oh. Sorry, we can.
There we go. Sorry, it took me a while to get myself off mute. I definitely agree with Puneet's definition. I think, particularly like as a law student, I saw a lot of firms kind of like virtue signaling and giving us all these definitions and explanations of like what it is and what it means to them. But to me, it's really just coming as you are and being in your authentic self. And I remember talking to, when I started here, to a colleague who got hired around the same time as me, and we just talked about like how we were just constantly at ease, and we felt that everybody was. So I think that's the best thing we do. And like Puneet, I agree that like it's one thing to have these statements and definitions and put it out, but it's the most important thing to me is kind of feeling it and living those values. And I think that like Puneet, our office does that through their actions, particularly like hiring practice. Our firm's diverse, the office culture, which just feels generally inclusive, and honestly the work we do. And yes, like we're lawyers, this firm of plaintiff side lawyers, and like money matters, but I think a lot of our lawyers like to kind of pursue claims based on like what their values are. So to pursue, human rights claims with like a race element, and fight for people, I think that's kind of like the biggest telltale when it comes to, equity, diversity, and inclusion for us. So.
Excellent. You mentioned one thing you mentioned that I resonate with is finding an associate or a colleague that you can relate to. I personally have been in situations where, or I've had jobs where I didn't feel like I didn't see someone that looked like me or had the same interests as me. I kind of felt like, not to say a loner, but I felt excluded. I didn't feel like I could relate to anyone at my job, but I always find it such a sense of relief when you can find someone that you can relate to. It just makes, to me personally, it makes the job easier, or tolerable. So no, you touched on that, and I that's something I definitely can relate to. How about you, Busayo? Well, actually, both Busayo and Danielle, since you both work for Monkhouse, how would you define equity, diversity, and inclusion? And then how does Monkhouse law showcase that?
Yeah, sure. I'll hop in first. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think what I'd probably just add on for me personally is looking at ways that organizations are able to remove some of the systemic barriers for diverse people, right? And so part of that is, as you heard Puneet saying about, those conversations about cottages and different things that you might feel, you don't relate to, and how those personal experiences, because of who is in power, can kind of act as a barrier to your advancement, because perhaps they don't feel like they relate to you as much as they relate to someone else who maybe has a similar background to them, right? So making sure to remove those types of barriers that could stop the upward progression for diverse people. And really, for me, it's meeting people where they are and celebrating those differences. I think that's really an attribute of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think in terms of our firm, we definitely don't have any of that virtue signaling, but I think our firm does a good job of looking at applicants, looking at their full package, and looking at talent, and not allowing internal biases to prevail. So we have a lot of diverse people working at our firm from various backgrounds, even various sexual orientations. So, and this isn't something that was intentionally done where, they were trying to pad stats and say, oh, okay, we've got someone from here, from there. It's just something that naturally happened because the firm was looking for talent, and everybody has talent, right? So as long as you keep that at the foremost of the conversation, I think you end up with a more diverse workplace, because you're definitely going to value and respect the perspectives of all these different people and what they can bring to an organization.
Of course.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with Busayo. I came into the firm as a student, and I know this is kind of alluding to maybe some of the other questions, but one thing that I looked for was a diverse group of individuals, knowing that their talent was, all equal and the same. It's just about being able to have different people from different backgrounds with different perspectives, and that's what Canada is based upon, right? So if we're representing clients from different backgrounds with different perspectives, we should have lawyers who are also from different backgrounds with different perspectives. Yeah. It just makes a better overarching ideology in terms of, the work that we do and the people that we help. And it also gives our clients an opportunity to seek from diverse employment lawyers, right? Within the firm itself, I feel like the number one focus is diversity. Once there's diverse individuals working in the firm, then we can start to talk about equity and inclusion. And I think it all kinds of folds in with itself. We don't necessarily have a EDI manager or, a specific, as Busayo said, specific things that we touch upon on our website, for example, about us being a diverse firm. But just by virtue of being a diverse firm, I think everyone has those equitable opportunities to take on different types of files, different type of work. We don't have to discuss the cottage or try to impress a certain partner because we think that their values or their culture is something that we need to, reach to or strive to in order to get a good file or in order to get good work. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that just having diversity itself will help breed these other two components of inclusion and equity.
Of course, I 100% agree. I do believe having a diverse workplace makes everyone, like I said, makes everyone feel included. Also just puts on a good reputation for the company itself to show that, we are we're more than just an organization. We're a family. We're a very diverse family. We acknowledge, we recognize, and we appreciate the uniqueness of individuals, whether it's their cultural background is, their sexual orientation, their religion. It doesn't matter. And it's good that we also have, from a legal point of view, that we have the Human Rights Code, the Ontario Human Rights Codes to solidify that, you know, an individual is protected under these codes. They're protected under these rights, that they should not be discriminated against. And that's that's some of the things that not many people, surprisingly, aren't familiar with, and that is the Ontario Human Rights Code. But Danielle, you had also mentioned that when it comes to what was it again? When it comes to being a minority, the things that you look out for is finding people that look like you. So what I'm curious to know is, or what I've read about actually, was that when it comes to a visible minority, like for example myself, when I look for jobs, some of the things that I do look for are people that look like me. That's where I feel like I have a sense of belonging. And I'm sure some of you can agree with that, as majority can agree with that as well, when it comes to looking for individuals. And I'm pretty sure you've also worked with clients who have said, you know, they don't feel welcomed because there's people that they're not enough people that look like them. So what I have for those who would like to answer is, as a visible minority, what kind of research should we, as a visible minority, what kind of research should we look for in an organization to make sure that they are implementing these policies, these equity, diversity, and inclusive policies in a work environment?
I can start with that, just because I think myself and Osaro probably were the most recent applicants to a job. For me personally, I did look for someone who looked like me. If there wasn't someone who looked just like me, someone who's also a person of color, so that I can just ask them what their personal experience was at the firm. I reached out to Busayo, who became also my champion at the firm throughout the application and interview process, where she could, and with still being removed and non-biased in regards to me, she was still able to champion me in that way and made me feel comfortable in regards to wanting to work at that firm. And I reached out to multiple other people of color and people of non-color as well at the firm to ask about their experience. And I think that's a good way to see if you will truly fit in with that culture and truly fit in with the people there. And I think that's important. Particularly our firm doesn't have an EDI manager, as I said, or a department that specifically deals with those types of issues and concerns. So I didn't have an opportunity to ask about those things, but if you do see that they have an EDI manager, or on their website they talk about diversity and inclusion and a department or initiative that they have, to ask questions about that as well and do your research on those initiatives and departments.
Of course. Would anyone else like to add in?
I'll just add, with today's ability to research anything online, you should have a look at the leadership, right? Is there someone that looks like you within the leadership or trending towards that? I think you can spot that pretty easy these days, and it's a really good indicator, I think, that, well, there's someone there that is recognized for their merits, and reach out to them. I think the best way to get a job is actually probably reaching out to leadership rather than applying. So there's a couple of benefits there, but you can always reach out and just externally see those types of people who look like you, or people who are diverse moving up the chain.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to also make the announcement to our attendees that that if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A feature. You are more than welcome to ask our panelists and myself if you have any questions, or if you'd like to share your story as well, you are more than welcome to do so. In fact, we actually have a question to start off with for Danielle. So Danielle, the question is, so would you say that the attraction to the law firm was knowing Busayo, who already worked there, and how did it weigh into your decision to apply for that firm?
Actually, I did not know Busayo before I applied to the firm. I saw the firm's website, I saw Busayo, I reached out to her, I reached out to another individual at the firm as well. And, I just had a general conversation with her. And it was not just that she was a woman of color, but that she was intelligent. And she told me that she had a good experience working there and talking about the culture of the firm. But in general, I think having those conversations with multiple people at the firm is important. I actually, if I'm being honest, was stalking this firm for a very long time because I did know that I wanted to practice employment law at a small firm, maybe or maybe not on Bay Street. And it just so lucked out that that was the case. But, it was just me reaching out and making that first contact. And sometimes it's scary to do. Particularly in the field of law where you think, you may not get a response, people are super busy, but you have to make the effort, right? If you want to know if that's a place that you want to work, you need to make the effort to get as much information as you can about the culture, the people, the work they do, the organization in itself. I think that's important to do your due diligence on your end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can also agree, Puneet, you had mentioned regarding looking into leadership. I think that's very important. I think it's important that companies promote visible minorities and try to encourage visible minorities to leadership programs. And in a way, when I say encourage, I mean, make it a clear path to help them reach to that level. And I'm sure there are a lot of suitable candidates who are people of color who have the credentials to be leaders, but it always helps when you see that for yourself. It always helps when senior management can bring that on to us and can allow us to reach such levels. I think that's very important. And like I said, it also it has a good look on the company itself. So I definitely agree with that. Thank you so much for your question. Like I said, everyone, you're more than free to ask any of our panelists questions regarding today's discussion. I'm sure they're eager to help to answer them. In addition, with inclusion and diversity, we also have to talk about the downsides of this in regards to not every company is as welcoming as we want them to be. So my next question kind of goes into the discriminatory, the moments where you feel you're being discriminated. And I would like to know for each of you or from either one of you, what if an employee is feeling like they're being discriminated against, what would you say, whom should they contact? And what would be the steps for an employee to take when they feel like they're being discriminated against? I know it can be super intensive. I know there's not just a 1, 2, 3 step. I know there's a 1A, B, C, D, E, F, G step. But from your perspective and from your knowledge, what would be some of the few things that you would tell an employee, a client, the steps that they would need to take if they feel like the company or they themselves is being discriminated?
Let's start this one off.
I noticed that you're off mute. Do you want to go?
Oh,
first?
were you going to go, Osaro? Go ahead.
No, okay, sure. So my kind of like first steps would be to recommend that person make a complaint like to the appropriate personnel. So if it's a colleague that's doing it, to your direct reporter, immediate supervisor. If it's your supervisor, then the person ahead of them. And I also think that it's an important, maybe that's just me as a lawyer speaking, but to get things in writing. And I think that a lot of racism happens through, conversations or subtle actions or things like that. And it can be difficult to like point out or prove And so I think that it's really important. One thing that I would recommend is to make those complaints or have those conversations, and then also like follow up in an email if you can, just so that there's like a written record of, you know, what was going on. Taking notes is also great too, but I think that the best thing that you can do is like, you know, bring it to the attention of, you know, the company generally, particularly because, you know, most practically speaking, they're your first point of like they're your first kind of remedy or person who can do something about it. And then of course, like keep a detailed record. And if, you know, the company's response isn't what you were looking for, or, you know, you felt like they're not being supportive, then I guess for you Ontario folks, one of my esteemed colleagues, or there's lots of lawyers out there who can help you, would be, you know, your next point of contact, from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. It's always important to write things down. It's always important to keep evidence, physical evidence of you know, events that take place in regards to, you know, anytime you're feeling discriminated against. I think it's important because, I mean, there's always the word of mouth, there's always the he say, she say, or your word against theirs. But I feel like when you have that concrete evidence by writing things down and actually taking note of what, you know, the events, I think that's what really helps for sure. Mm-hmm.
I would agree. And just to add to Osaro, his points, I'd say that if, you know, if it's a situation where perhaps you're, you know, you're experiencing a certain employee who's making certain comments, or, you know, it always happens to be verbal. Another thing that you can do on top of getting things in writing is also perhaps recording some of those interactions. Is if this is becoming something that is regular, perhaps you might consider, okay, if this person regularly is making these comments, that you know, you go ahead and record one of those interactions, and that's something that you could provide to, you know, if it's a HR department who's going to do an internal investigation, you can provide it there. Or, you know, if it goes beyond the organization, it can't be resolved internally, and you might have to, you know, launch a human rights complaint, something that could be used in that case. So something to think about. Because these cases are so difficult to prove, any things that you can do while it's happening to, you know, create a thread of evidence to be relied on later will really help you with trying to prove your case later on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just to add on to that, maybe now going down the process of you know, the stages within the company and then moving to the Human Rights Tribunal, making a complaint potentially. I think it's important for people to know, because I've spoken to many who are fearful that they would be terminated or reprimanded if they bring a claim outside of the employer. And, you know, under the code, the Human Rights Code, you know, you're free from reprisal, you're protected from reprisal. So if you do make a complaint and your employer, you know, either suspends you or terminates you, then that's where you should seek one of the esteemed lawyers here that are on the panel, or any other employment lawyer, to get advice in regards to those steps. And don't feel afraid or be weary in regards to bringing claims that you have, how minute they may seem to the employer, in regards to any kind of discrimination.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how long would you say the process would take for, I mean, I guess it could depend on how extensive the claim is, the complaint is, but roughly on average, like how long would you say the process would take? Or whenever you dealt with a situation like this, how long did you find the process was?
Well, I'll just say, oh, go ahead. Pre-COVID and post-COVID are two different timelines. Pre-COVID, I would say 2 years from start to finish might be a reasonable estimate if it goes all the way. Post-COVID, I've never finished one. So,
Oh no.
we're in a waiting, you know, waiting for whether it's a settlement conference or just dates. Everyone just seems to be waiting.
My goodness, I'm really shocked that it would take a pandemic would actually, it would take longer. to go through the process. That's really unfortunate.
Well, it just goes to show there's a huge backlog.
Mm.
And I think a lot of the staff are also working from home.
Mm.
And so both of those things in play together have created a massive backlog. I'm sure in all provinces, not just Ontario, but there's a lot of waiting right now.
My goodness, that's unfortunate. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, moving on with again under the topic of discrimination. One thing that I read upon when I was doing my research in regards to seeking advice, legal advice, is also talking on the discussion of contracts, employee contracts. But before I get into that, one thing I would like to ask you as well, anyone who is willing to answer, is the myth of, or I guess the barrier when seeking advice, legal advice. One thing that I found when it comes to a barrier for that is that a lot of times people feel reluctant to seek legal advice because they feel like they will not win a case. They feel like it's them versus a company. So how could you encourage candidates to reach out to lawyers, to employment lawyers, or to associates to make them feel comfortable that you are on their side? What are some advices that you would give to them to let them know that you're protected, what you're doing is secure, and that they not so much they have nothing to worry about, but that they're in good hands? How do you make them feel comfortable enough to reach out to you?
I think for me, the first thing I would say is don't be reluctant to reach out to a lawyer. Like, people are just reluctant because there is no information or misinformation about contacting a lawyer. Most, I wouldn't say all, but at least for our firm, we have a free 30-minute consultation where you can talk about your matter. It's free. You can discuss those potential options if there are. We explain the process moving forward, but at least that 30 minutes, you can get some kind of advice in regards to whether you do have a claim, whether there is a risk in that claim, whether you should be speaking further to a lawyer or a senior lawyer, depending on the issue. So I think the first thing is just to seek the advice, right? Like, don't be afraid to at least look. You can Google different firms and see if they have a free consultation. Internet is available to everyone, hopefully. And if not, there's ways for you to contact lawyers. So I just think people are just hesitant in general because they're not really aware of what potential options they may have. But if they just do a little bit of research, they can, get some information on the onset where it's not too overwhelming to them in that initial phase.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's always helpful when law firms can provide a free consultation. I think that's very engaging, very welcoming. And you can get a lot out of 30 minutes for sure. 30 minutes, an hour, 15 minutes, with the right lawyer that can provide the applicable information. I think that's the first step. I think that's super helpful. And I do appreciate the fact that there are law firms that stress on that encourage that. Like you said, don't feel reluctant to reach out to a law firm. And again, misinformation it can be very convincing to deter a person away from reaching out. So I find it's always important when a law firm can really encourage potential clients to reach out to them. Absolutely.
And Khadija, just to add that, I agree with everything Danielle said. But I think that there's also a perception that, I just can't afford this. Like, so even if I do get the information and I'm told, that I have a claim, there's just no way I can actually do it. And I know our firm offers this, but a lot of lawyers out there do take claims on contingency, which for us and for almost all lawyers will depend on, the value of your claim and, the likelihood of success. And like, so to add to what Danielle said, I would very much encourage people to just go ahead and speak to a lawyer, because you never know. Because like, as a lawyer, like, we're in the best position to evaluate claims and whether or not they're worth going forward with. So you might get a lawyer, like, quote unquote, for free, or at least at no cost to you out of pocket. So, yeah, I very much agree and would encourage people to just pick up the phone and just talk to somebody about it, because you just never know.
Mhm. I agree as well. I agree as well.
Just to add, I'd also say that part of it is people not knowing what they don't know, right? Especially for those who are new to the country, that experience is just trying to navigate how to do basic things here and what are the different practices, especially if you're not familiar with the laws here versus a country that you might have grew up in. So I think part of it is connecting with the community and that being a bridge as well, right? So programs like this, various organizations that people go to for help when they're trying to access job resources. Those are different opportunities to go there maybe if there's a situation and ask for help. And if those organizations also know that hey, this is probably something you should talk to a lawyer about. That's also an opportunity to get that information out there beforehand so that people get more comfortable with the idea of speaking to a lawyer, at least getting the information, as well as feeling comfortable enough to talk about it. Because I know that there is a lot of fear there for some people because they just want to, if it's an on-the-job situation, a lot of their livelihood, everything depends on that job, right? Especially if they are the primary breadwinner. So there could be a lot of fear around disrupting that source of income. So I think it's trying to build some trust, put some confidence in the person to be able to speak up, advocate for themselves, to just have that conversation to find out what's possible. So that a lawyer and the person can take it from there to at least know what their options are. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll just add one more thing. It's also important. Don't wait until you're fired to call the lawyer.
Ooh.
At the first sniff of something fishy going on, or when you first feel, okay, this could be a problem 6 months down the road, call at that time. And again, the lawyer could guide you on actions to take to maybe correct the situation right then. So you don't need a lawyer later, or the lawyer will be very well prepared if something does happen requiring litigation or maybe just a letter 6 months down the road. So don't wait until maybe it's too late.
Don't wait until it's too late. That's the quote of the day. No, I absolutely agree with each and every one of you. I believe, like I said, I believe it's very important when a law firm can encourage and can make a person feel like they can reach out to them. Like you said, don't wait till it's too late. Don't feel reluctant to reach out. Having that call, even if it's 15-30 minutes, can give you all the information, if not all, most information, or enough information to take the next steps and know that this is a serious matter. And reaching out to a law firm, to a lawyer, it would be very necessary and very important. We have a couple questions here that I would like to go through. The first one here we have is, not all companies mention of their job description that they are equal opportunity employer or that they value employment equity and diversity. The first question is, should this be a mention that candidates have to pay attention to? And then the follow-up question is, should people dare to apply if a job posting say they are looking for only specific candidates for the language, age, and gender? I will say, I do remember reading when I was doing my research that, if I'm not mistaken, that a company is not allowed to ask you for your religion, or ask you about your sexual orientation, gender, et cetera, but not to say that there are companies that still under the table will do it. So yes, so going to the question, is this something that a candidate should be paying attention to, and should they still apply or even give them the time of the day if they're looking for specific candidates? I also wanted to add to, which reminded me that I remember I learned that certain companies, there are some loopholes, for example, like the LCBO, you have to be in Ontario, you have to be I think the minimum is 18 to serve, 19 to drink. But I guess in that situation, that's different. But what about the companies that really have no, to be candid, have no business asking for those specific things? How would should this be a mention that candidates should look into, and should they still look for a job that's only seeking specific candidates? Puneet, may I start with you?
Sure. So I mean, it's tough. I mean, when you're looking for a job, I think the best advice is apply to as many places as you can, right? I wouldn't close the door, because some employers, it may just be an innocent mistake, right? And wait till you get there to make that judgment. Now, one thing I have seen myself, and I'll call this sort of a loophole. You say the candidate must speak X language, and essentially that's a message saying, well, we're really hiring people from this specific group. Now, most of the time, that actually is a visible minority group. So, I mean, frankly, if I don't speak, I don't want to single a language out, but a particular language, and that's a requirement for the job, that's not somewhere I'd look to work. So, I don't think there's a blanket answer. I think it's best to go in and see what happens in the interview process, or when you start the interview process. And if you don't get a call, maybe you know the answer at that time.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, I do agree. I think the first step is just apply regardless. I've been told many times, apply to as many jobs as you can. One of them is sure enough to call you back, even if they have a specific requirement. For example, the most recent one I found was I had to have 3 years of experience in a certain field. And I only had 1 year, but I still applied. Haven't heard back from them. I won't name drop them, but I'm patiently waiting. But there could be situations where a company is asking for X amount of years, or like you said, to speak a specific language, and you find out you don't meet that requirement, but you still apply, and therefore there could be a chance that you do make it to the recruitment stage, because they look at other things outside of that, I guess, barrier in that case. But I do agree. There is no blanket answer, but one day I do agree with you on that, is to still apply regardless. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of hard to assess when you're just in the application phase, right? If there's that barrier, it's kind of like, should I or should I not apply? But, as you said, the answer is probably just apply, right? But if you get further in the stage, even though they had those specific requirements, now we have to look to see if they're reasonable requirements for the job, right? They hired you, but yet they still have these requirements. Now, can they accommodate you, right? I'm assuming if they're hiring you and they have these specific requirements, they are going to accommodate you. But I think you should just make sure that those accommodations are helpful to you. And then the company has to balance whether those accommodations put them in some undue hardship. But realistically, it's hard to answer that question. You're right. And there's no blanket answer, because you're just applying at this point, right? You may not necessarily be in the interview stage yet.
Mm-hmm. That is true, yeah.
And just to add to that, one kind of practical tip that I have definitely done in the past, pre-law, throwing that out there, is that don't be afraid to follow up with the employer about the application process. And you can do that yourself, but if you feel like it might influence how your application is received, get a friend to do it. Somebody who's not interested in the job, and just say like, hey, saw your job poster. I'm wondering, is this a requirement or an asset, and that kind of thing. And I think that, job applications are very difficult to, job postings are very difficult to evaluate. I don't always know how much employers spend time on them. And just because something is not in there, like they value diversity and equity inclusion, doesn't mean they haven't thought about it or it's not a value for them. Maybe they just haven't included in there. Maybe they have their reasons as to why. But Yeah, I would say following up with the employer, because sometimes, depending on what kind of job you're applying to, an application is kind of a little bit of a time investment, and can be exhausting to get a bunch of rejections. So if you're applying to jobs en masse, you don't want to waste your time. So send a quick email, either yourself or get a friend to do it, and see what the employer says about the quote unquote requirement.
Mhm. I never actually thought about that, using a friend to call on behalf. I've never thought about, I always thought, okay, it's me, don't get anybody else involved, etc. But that's actually a good idea, because then you can use them. They can ask questions, they can probably find out more information for you as well. No, that's actually a great idea. I like that. I like that. We do have a couple more questions actually from the audience. Everyone's flooding in with questions. I love it. Putting you guys on the spot. The next question I have here, I think this is going back to Busayo. You had mentioned that according to what Ms. Busayo said, are there specific organizations that work with newcomers to provide them with information and resources?
Yeah, there are. One I can think of on the top of my head. I know a lot of people access the YMCA's services, and they usually are a good point of reference if you're new, and can help with getting you started, and also have you know like if you don't have access to computers, internet, they usually have that stuff on deck so that you could at least use their computers to get started on applications, et cetera. And they have people there that could assist you with navigating. I don't know if other people are familiar with other organizations, but
I know
YMCA is the one I'm thinking of.
the YMCA is very good. I used to volunteer with their newcomer program, so I know that they definitely invest in assisting newcomers. And from them, you can bounce off to other programs within the community. So usually each YMCA is in a specific community, and then they'll have additional resources for that community. I know, for example, in Brampton, they have multiple different newcomer hubs for people to go. I don't know the specific names, but if you were to go on the YMCA website, or going to the YMCA, they'd probably be able to direct you to any newcomer hubs within the community. So maybe touch base with them first, and they can, give you those people to contact and those resources as well.
Absolutely. And I do know there's a few companies, like for example, I think PC Financial and Manulife, who work with the organizations that I guess they're specific or focus on the visible minorities, that focus on newcomers, and trying to pave a way for them to find in places of employment, as well as aid to on top of that as well. But I do know those are just the two that come to my mind. But I know there's a few companies out there that specifically, like for example, in the recruiting for their employee resource groups and their recruitment team, they actively go to job fairs or events that are catered or dedicated towards newcomers of Canada and immigrants as well. So those are just a few that I can think of as well, but those are also very important too. I personally like when a company takes steps to reach out to newcomers of Canada, because they're here to work, they're here to live, to start a new life. And it's good when Canadian companies can reach out to them and say, hey, you're welcome here. We're here to provide some job options for you as well. Mm-hmm.
And just to do a BC shout out, if there is anybody on the call who's from the West Coast and needs resources, feel free to just email me, and I'm happy to connect you.
Shout out to the West Coast. We'll show them love too. A couple more questions I have here. One of them is, if the organization is a bilingual service provider, a specific language will be a requirement to be able to serve the clientele. Oh, this is I guess this is more of a statement than a question. I proposed it as a question. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that one popped up in while we were having that previous discussion with the question that was in the chat about specific things that might be in the job posting, like language. That's accurate, right? So really the question is it a legitimate job requirement, right? So is this necessary in order to do the job, right? If that's, honest, of course, then there isn't anything wrong with having that as a job requirement, as long as the organization's able to show it's an honest job requirement required to be able to do that specific, those specific tasks related to the job.
Mhm. And then speaking of job, that actually brings me to my next topic, and that is discussing employment, job applications, as well as contracts, signing contracts. So I know all of you have dealt with legal services such as employment contracts. And while a candidate isn't given a contract until around the recruitment stage or the interview stage, I still think it's important to have this discussion to talk about a little bit more about what employment contracts are, and then also discussing our rights when we're given one. A myth that I read online was that employment contracts can be easily read through. You receive the contract, you go through it, everything looks fine to you, you sign it, give it back, everything is done. However, I've come to realize in reality, no, it is not the case. It can be quite intensive. And so with that being said, that's when I believe the involvement of an employee lawyer is necessary. But for you, why do you think, what are some key factors of having an employment lawyer, and what are some things that an employment lawyer could look into that, like for example, myself would not be able to find in a contract? Or what are some things, key factors in a contract that a candidate should look over for that could be helpful with the aid of an employment lawyer? May I start with you, Osaro?
Yeah. So I think for me, as someone who's doing a lot of wrongful dismissal right now, the termination clause would be a place that I'd look to. And it's much different in Ontario than BC. But generally speaking, like that just speaks to what your entitlements are if your employer were to terminate, and also speaks to like why they can terminate you. Outside of that, like I've had a few people come to me and they just like generally want to know what the rights and obligations are. Contracts are, yeah, like you said, very tricky, and even things like how your employer can change the job over time, and things like, yeah, basically like what you could be on the hook for, or like what your employer can do, or how your job can change over time. I think is what's critical. And like you want to have a lawyer do it because because we deal with these issues all the time and like see where things go wrong in employment relationships. We have like a lot of foresight as to the things that kind of like should or shouldn't be, and there are things that you should be thinking about. And also, generally speaking, I do think that a lot of people don't feel like they have bargaining power when it comes to their contracts, but that's not true. Definitely not true in every case, but even in a lot of cases, I think that employers oftentimes don't even really think about their contracts and like what's in there. A lot of them, especially smaller employers, like just have historical contracts. So yeah, I think it's always good when you can to put it in front of a lawyer first and see, and just to get a general sense of like what your rights and obligations are under that contract.
My question for you, Osaro, is I guess my misconception with when given a contract is that it has to be signed right away. But what I would like to know is there a length of time that a candidate has to sign the contract? Because I guess the way I thought of it was, once you get the contract, you have to read it and then sign it at the spot. But is a candidate able to take the contract home, look it over, speak to a lawyer as well? And if so, how long is the given time?
Yeah. There's actually like no hard and fast rule. I think from an employer's perspective, it's like best practice to, give the employee a contract in advance so they can actually read and understand it. I think if you're signing it, particularly like under duress or in circumstances where you actually can't understand it, that could speak to the validity of the contract. But like I would encourage people to not be afraid to ask for the contract in advance, just so that you have a chance to like carefully review it and understand what you're signing. But yeah, a lot of employers have this practice where they bring people in on their first day of training. They're about to do orientation and they put a contract for them and they just say like sign. And yeah, I would not be afraid to be like, hey, you know what? Like I just need a day because like I'm just somebody who's very, very diligent, or like I like to know what I'm signing before I do. You might get a lot of pushback on that. But I think that, the best practice would be just to ask before your first day, like a week or so, or, depending on when you get hired, of course, however much you can before your first day, just ask for the contract, and tell them why. And so I think that puts you in the best possible position. But yeah, there's no rule as to, when exactly you have to sign it. It's really up to the employer, and what their practice is.
Oh, where were you when I was 16 with my first contract? I wish I had known, but it's okay.
And
Sorry,
I think just to
Danielle.
add on to that quickly, sorry, I saw everyone was a bit frozen here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I think just to quickly add on to that, don't be afraid to ask for an extension. Like if they give you a 1 week time frame, a 2-day time frame, don't be afraid to say, can I have a week extension?
Again, where were you when I was 16? This is helpful because I myself did not know that. I had this assumption that you're given a contract, they want the contract on the day that you go for the interview or the day that you're presented a contract. I did not know, 16-year-old me did not know that I could take this home, reach out to someone, look it over in the comfort of my own home. There's that pressure when you're given a contract that especially for someone who's new to the job industry, they're presented a contract and they quickly go over and they think, okay, this is good. This seems legit. Well, you would hope it's legit, but legit in the sense of they don't have to second guess some of the things or question it, and then they just sign it. And then a few months later, they realize, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't know that this was something that I had to be aware of because it's in the contract. So it's good to know. It's good to know that, we have the option to take it home, to reach out to an employment lawyer, to reach out to somebody to look it over and see if there are any, God forbid, any loopholes or suspicious policies.
I'll also add, you also have the opportunity to negotiate that contract. Don't be afraid to ask for more money. I think racialized individuals are always hesitant to do that. And I don't know why, but we need to ask for more money. Ask for more vacation pay. They might say no, or they might say yes.
And in the situation that they say no, what would you say the next steps would be?
Well, it depends how badly you want the job, but you might just accept the original offer in that case. Or if there's something else you can ask for in lieu, well, okay, I want more notice for termination. I want 4 weeks vacation time or 3 weeks vacation time, whatever the case may be. But my personal opinion, it shows your eagerness for the role, actually, rather than you're not going to look greedy. If that's, I think, when I was a kid, that's not even a kid. When I was an adult, that's what I was afraid of, and there's no reason to be. You should be confident that you're bringing a lot to the table, and this employer wants to hire you, and that's that.
Absolutely, I agree with that 100%. I would just say that that's also one of the things that an employment lawyer could help you with, right? So part of the advantage of getting a contract reviewed is an employment lawyer is going to go through the contract with you, talk about the various terms, explain what things mean. And part of that conversation would let you know that, hey, in the event this doesn't work out, because one of the most popularly litigated things in a contract is the termination clause, right? So that, that could be a source of a negotiation in itself, right? Where you would be asking for more in that event. And so these are things you do want to have some advice about, some guidance about how to have that conversation. I do a lot of contract reviews where people don't even realize something that is important to them hasn't actually been put in the contract because there were conversations back and forth. And they said, yeah, you're going to be able to work remotely, but it's nowhere in the contract, right? So different things like that, making sure that anything that was promised to you is also on paper and you're not just counting on the fact that it was said to be enough.
Mhm. And so my question to that then would be, if it's said to you, and again, I'm speaking from a candidate perspective, if something is said to me but it's not in contract, am I allowed to say to the employer, hey, you mentioned this, but it's not in contract? Is there a way that you can put that in the contract so that it's not just word of mouth, it's actually on written paper? Like, am I allowed to tell the employer, go back and change your contract to include
Absolutely.
that?
You can
Okay.
say, I read over the contract. I just noticed that, XYZ wasn't in there. Just wanted to, follow up to ask if that could be added in. Just as simple as just asking for it to be added. And if they say, like, what, depending on what they say in response, it's likely that they'll just say, oh yeah, sure, I'll put it in there. Or if they say something else, that at least it still gives you confidence that it's not an issue. Right? Because not every single thing will be in a contract. Sometimes you have things that will be in like an employee handbook, or right. So if they tell you that XYZ and it's not like a very important thing, like for instance, if they tell you the company's going to give you a computer to use to do your job, that's not something that you absolutely 100% need to be in the contract, because you would expect that if you're going to be able to do the job, they're going to give you the computer access that they said they would give you in order to do the job, right? So it depends on what it is.
Yeah.
If there was an agreed upon bonus, you want that to be in the contract, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
it kind of depends.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for answering that question, providing some knowledge. I have one question from earlier that I apologize I looked over, but the question was, if an employer is asking if you need an accommodation due to a disability, is that actually a way to discriminate prior to an interview? If an employer is asking if you need an accommodation due to disability, is that actually a way to discriminate prior to an interview? I mean, I have my opinion on that, but I'll allow you guys to speak first. To anyone who would like to answer, take on that question head on.
If I understand correctly, is this when, because oftentimes companies will say if you need an accommodation for the interview, right, either accessibility issues, etc., then they usually provide those accommodations. So I'm not sure if they're talking about that or if they're speaking about that prospective employer asking about accommodations if they were to receive the job.
I'm not sure. Hopefully, this was sent by Judith McKinnon. Hi, Judith. If you'd be so kind to just a little bit elaborate on that question regarding accommodation, that way we can get a better understanding of it, and we'll be more than happy to respond. But in the meantime, we have another one. It's more of it's a situation, and they are just inquiring to know if it's legal. So the situation is, I had a situation where after the interview, the position was confirmed, but while the final checks were being made, I got a call from another manager saying I had to redo the interview, the typing part. I took the test as requested, but at the end of the day, he refused the position, saying my typing was slow, and offered another position I had not applied for. Was this legal? I can answer that. I can just quickly say that question one more time. So they interviewed, after the interview, the position was confirmed, But while the final checks were being made, they received another call from the manager saying that they had to redo the interview. I guess it was a typing test. They took the test as requested, but at the end of the day, they were refused the position because due to their typing being rather slow, and was offered another position that they did not apply for. Is this legal?
It's an interesting scenario. In the question itself, it says the position was confirmed, but then there were final checks. So I'm not sure if this is a conditional offer that the person received. If it was a conditional offer, and that condition was several background checks and or a typing skills test, then maybe this is fine. If you didn't meet the typing requirement and like, we do have another position because we like you so much, that's there's still an offer. But I mean, without having more facts, it's difficult to answer. But if this is a situation where you had a job and you left because you were getting this great new typing job, and then at the last minute they said, well, no, actually, this is the other job and it's for lower pay, that could be, a big issue. So we would need more facts. And I hate to give the answer, it depends, but really it does depend here.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. Yeah, that's quite that is quite an interesting situation that you got the position, but then took it away because the typing was slow. I feel like if that was the situation, maybe they could have specified that at the beginning. Is that even a thing?
Well, it's I do think another important point to bring up is, some offers are conditional offers, right? And until all the conditions are met and you've confirmed that it's no longer conditional, and you shouldn't 100% tell yourself, I have this job. It's still pending. I think there was an update. It was not a conditional offer. The two managers who gave the interview said that the position was for me, that everything was perfect. Right. So I mean, I hope it wasn't just a bait and switch. It could be problematic. We would need more facts.
And then sorry, go ahead.
Just to say, I'd say this is probably a situation where you want to maybe have a consultation, depending on how long ago it was, because this needs more time than we'd be able to get to it here. So you'd need to have a back and forth conversation, a number of questions would need to be asked in order to kind of get to the bottom of this and see if there's a potential legal issue. One thing I did want to mention that that we hadn't mentioned before, there are some time limits for when you can bring legal claims. So that's really important. So when it's a human rights issue, part of it is if you think that you potentially are being discriminated against, go talk to a lawyer, do it soon, because you only have 1 year from when the incident occurred to make a claim, right? So it's very fast if it's a human rights case that's going to go towards is strictly just human rights. If it's an employment issue, then that could be a 2-year limitation from when it occurred. So just wanted to note that, so people make sure that, count back the days of when the incident happened, make sure you talk to a lawyer within that time frame.
Oh, see, I did not know that there was a 1-year limit. Is there a specific reason why only given a year, or I guess that's just how it is?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is they decided that it would be 1 year. The norm for litigation, well, it depends on the types of claims, but for employment claims, it's 2 years. For some other claims, it could be beyond that. But in this specific instance, for human rights claims, it's 1 year. I think they're trying to make it so that people move fast with getting these issues dealt with, so that the employer has an opportunity to respond and isn't potentially, I guess, on the hook for something that happened maybe like 10 years ago, right? So there's there's a time frame that it needs to be chosen for which you need to act on it, they chose 1 year. I'm sorry, I don't have any, great insight into why they went with the 1 year.
Pardon?
I don't have any great insight other than, there had to be a time frame and they decided to choose 1 year.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, the better thing is to make sure that you do it. It's better to do it as soon as possible. Personally, I feel like, yeah, not the quicker, but the earlier, the better, while it's still fresh and while you have all the concrete evidence to do so. I have here, just going back to the previous question that we asked regarding accommodations due to disability, there is an update on that. And it says accommodations for a written part of an application. The written part is part of the application completed prior to the interview. Sometimes people feel nervous to request this. I guess that's, sorry, if an employer is asking you need an accommodation due to a disability, is that actually a way to discriminate prior to an interview? Accommodations for written part of an application. The written part is part of the application completed prior to the interview. Sometimes people feel nervous to request this. I didn't know that people, there's a reluctancy to request an accommodation, but I think that's something that we're entitled to, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the thing is, you can let an employer know that you have a disability or a reason that you would.
Are you still there, Danielle?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. All my screens are frozen, but I now see Khadija speaking. So, no, I was just going to say, in terms of if you have a disability or a reason for an accommodation, it's probably your decision if you want to tell your employer, but then they have the duty to try to accommodate you, right? So that's important to know. But you don't have to disclose a disability prior to you disclosing it on your own recognizance. So you can just leave that part empty. You don't have to answer questions about whether you have a disability or not. You don't have to answer questions that they ask you about race or ethnicity or anything else that could be a protected part of the code.
Yeah. And just to add to that, if the question is, if you're wondering if actually asking the question in and of itself is discriminatory, in that case, I would probably say no, because like there is this presumably legitimate writing requirement they have for in order to evaluate candidates. And so I actually think that it's the opposite. I think by asking if you need an accommodation with respect to that part of the application, they're being inclusive. But like Danielle said, like you have a choice as to how you want to answer that question. But it would only be discriminatory if they were asking you about an accommodation or something like that, without a good reason to do so. But if it's for to fairly evaluate you, I'd say that they're actually doing the right thing in that case.
Good to know. Thank you. Thank you for answering that question and then also providing insight and knowledge and advice on that scenario, and with the previous one as well, with the test, the typing tests. I believe the person has responded saying thank you. Moving on to discussing. Well, actually, no. What I want to get into now is this. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this idea of what the Canadian experience is like, because we were talking about we were talking about newcomers. We were talking about applying for jobs, and then also discussing what companies are looking for. And one of the things when I was doing my research that I found is this thing called the Canadian experience. For those who are not familiar with what it is, what I found out is this this idea that a candidate needs to be working within Canada for an X amount of years in order to be qualified to work for a Canadian company. And according to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, they have stated that it is in fact it can be discriminatory, especially towards newcomers. For those who would like to further discuss this, have you, I guess for a question for any one of you who would like to answer, have you ever dealt with a client that's come to you and said, hey, I applied for a job position that didn't hire me or wasn't looking to hire me because they felt like I didn't have enough experience, but not experience in sense of in that field, but experience in terms of being, I guess, a Canadian, or I didn't have enough experience because I haven't worked in this country long enough. And what could a candidate do when being approached with that situation?
Well, I can speak from personal experience. I'm Canadian, I was born here. I went to law school in the United States. And when I was first applying to jobs as a lawyer, I'd often come across a statement, must have a law degree from a Canadian law school. Now, I think it was difficult for me. And often I wouldn't get callbacks just based on that. And then I decided to, show that I was Canadian. That maybe wasn't the right approach looking back, but I had to really, with my cover letter and with my resume, make it scream that, hey, this guy is from Canada. He's been here his whole life. And it's something I went through, and I'm sure a lot of racialized lawyers or applicants for any job have to go through that. I think the term is whitewashing your resume. And it was a hard reality back then. And I had hoped since then that things have changed a bit, but I'm sure it still happens. So it's an unenviable position to have to balance being your authentic self and at the same time trying to get that job that you want to. And I mean, I don't have an answer about how best to do that, to be honest. If you want a particular job and they're asking for Canadian experience, highlight, maybe try to think about why they want that and try to highlight that in whether it's a cover letter or your resume, and make that speak to the other side. Try to contact someone, in leadership, when applying, and trying to build that connection already. I think we touched on that in the beginning, that if there's someone at the company you can maybe reach out to ask what it's like working there and maybe show your intrigue. But that's a tough question to answer.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear where you're coming from. And, you brought up a good point that reminded me of, I remember I was speaking to a few friends actually, and even just previous colleagues who have told me that in the past they had to, I guess, quote unquote, whitewash their resume by even changing their name, just because they were afraid that their birth name would be a barrier to them being hired. And personally, I find that just incredibly, it's sad. It's sad that a person has to go as far as changing their legal name to something more suitable for a company to even give them the time of day. And to me, I just think that's like I said, it's incredibly sad, and it's a barrier. It's a barrier that one has to, especially a person of color, has to deal with when they have such a unique name. But this is why it's important to work for a company that acknowledges uniqueness and diversity and doesn't look at things as your name as a qualification for you to work with their organization, with their company. It's quite sad, actually.
I would agree, Khadija. Funny when you brought that up, it reminded me pre-law school. I think I was just out. It was probably when I was fresh out of undergrad. I was having a lot of trouble trying to get my foot in the door as a new graduate, and so I did test it out to see, is it my name? Maybe that's why I'm not getting any calls. And so I actually changed the name to my middle name, which is Marianne, just to try and see if maybe a more English sounding name would get a different result. So same exact resume and just use my middle name instead, and actually started getting calls. So unfortunately, it is something that we have to think about if you have a unique name, or I guess a non-English sounding name, because frankly, my name is not unique in Nigerian culture. So depending on where you're from, your name might not be unique. It might just not be English sounding. So that is something that can affect us. And going back to this Canadian experience barrier, it is something that can be used to try and find out, or to kind of put a bit of a barrier of trying to get people who are Canadian, or really maybe more white adjacent to apply to the organization a lot of times. And so you do have to be careful around that, and maybe pushing back a bit. And sometimes it could be an honest mistake, right? So I'm not going to say that every organization that puts that there is specifically not trying to hire racialized people. There are some, but some of them might have just been doing the same thing that has been done since whoever started it. And so whenever they put out a job posting, it was on there 10 years ago. They keep putting out the same thing, and they've never updated it. It shouldn't be there. They shouldn't, unless it's an actual direct requirement for that job. But I think I would agree with Puneet and Osaro, some of the suggestions he had about reaching out and trying to get more information about the job, and using information around, okay, what is this job actually asking for? And then doing what Puneet said about making your cover letter or your resume really highlight the skills that they're actually requesting, because sometimes they say Canadian experience, but it's like, does it actually matter that it's Canadian experience, or do you just need someone who knows how to do X, Y, Z and can do it well? And then trying to highlight the specific skills to help with at least getting your foot in the door. And that way you could have a conversation to kind of explain to them that, I'm actually a very good fit. And it's funny because if we look at what's going on with this pandemic right now, and there's a nursing shortage, right? So I was actually watching an interview, and one of the nurses was saying about, there's a nursing shortage, and you have so many qualified nurses who just didn't do nursing in Canada, and it's so difficult for them to be able to get into nursing here. And we actually need nurses, right? So you can see how it can be so nonsensical to have like this Canadian experience barrier, and it's a disservice to to our community when this is enacted. So absolutely something that we as a society have to come up against and keep pushing back as much as we can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like I said, it is a barrier when you have to think about things that your name. And again, going off what you said with, do they really need a Canadian, someone who has Canadian experience? No, I think what it is important, and like Puneet said, is looking at your resume, looking at your cover letter, and looking, I think it's the experience in general that should matter, or the experience that is more, not accommodating, but similar to what they are looking for, that should matter, as opposed to where you're actually from. If you can be from China, or you can be from Ecuador, or you could be from South Africa, and have the skills that they need. What matters is that the skills that they're looking for, as opposed to where you actually come from, and wherever you get it from. I think like I said, what should matter is the skills at the end of the day. Absolutely. Thank you so much for answering that question. And then finally, what I also would like to discuss in regards to on the topic of Canadian experience is, I know there are a lot of companies out there that really focus on diversity, and they really focus on, promoting promoting inclusion for minorities, promoting inclusion for newcomers. And then there are some companies that, have this thing where it's called a diversity hire. And from what I read in regards to what a diversity hire is, companies that like to that push the recruitment of newcomers, but in a way where on the surface level, on the surface layer, it looks like they're trying to increase diversity and diversity in their organization, but it's more on a level where it's, I guess, through rose-colored glasses, as one would say, where they're not really necessarily hiring you because you are a person of color, but they're doing it to fit an agenda. So for those who would like to answer, my question to you regarding that is, is there really a way to differentiate or to look into a company that is hiring you because they genuinely want you, or are they hiring you to fit, I guess, a quota? If that makes sense.
Well, I think that, you never will know until you actually start working there, unfortunately. But I think, as I mentioned a while ago, essentially, diversity is just the first step. Getting in the diverse candidates is the first step. But in order to make an inclusive and equitable employer, you have to have those things, right? Now you have to be inclusive with those people. You have to give them a proportional opportunity to all the other, to a proportional chance for all the opportunities, right? So not just hiring someone because they're filling a quota and then, not giving them the same opportunities as other people, not engaging with them in the work the same way you do with other employees, not providing them those same opportunities, right? In an equitable way, right? And I think that's important. It's not just hiring the people, it's what you do once you hire them, right? To promote inclusion and equitable practices within your company.
Absolutely, and it can be including some things that I found that a lot of companies do to really promote the diversity and inclusion is workshops, unconscious bias training. Those are key factors to really show that we're a company that values the uniqueness and diversity of our employees. I know, I can't remember the name of the company, but I know there's one company that celebrates days, so days or months like Black History Month, or they'll celebrate Pride Day, or they'll celebrate religious and cultural events, for example, Eid or Diwali. It's those things I think really matter. And like you said, Danielle, you don't know about these things until you actually start working. But it's also helpful when a company can really promote that on the surface layer too, and it actually sticks once you remove that layer off, and that is working in the company after a few months. It's always important, but it's also unfortunate that you don't know about these things until you start working. You really just start to see, are they putting their money where their mouth is, really standing by what they believe in. I think that's what's important. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I also just kind of want to challenge the idea that that's always a bad thing in terms of being deliberate about your who you're hiring. I think it's fair for a company to look at their employees, or their makeup, and say, we need more diversity here, and to go out and actually do that. But just to add to Danielle's point, ultimately it's what you do once you get there. And I know that, I have a friend at a large law firm who talked about how she felt like her employer initially was just giving lip service to hiring diverse employees, but once they actually got there in terms of the numbers, they were able to develop this kind of base or this critical mass of diverse employees, and then things started to shift and change. So yeah, again, I think Danielle was making this point well, but it can be even if it's not with the best intentions, it can lead to institutional change when you just get people in the door. But yeah, ultimately it's what happens when you get there is what matters most, and not necessarily what their intentions were, whether or not it was a quota versus something else. I just don't think that matters, so long as you're supported once you're in.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering that question. Folks, again, you're more than welcome to ask questions in the Q&A chat box or in the chat box. I believe that is also an option if you have any questions, or if you also wanted to share a scenario or situation that you've experienced that or you're seeking advice from our panel. We'll be more than happy to answer it. I guess my final question, this is for all of you. It's more of a personal question. And I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably something I should have asked at the very beginning, but I'll still ask regardless. For each one of you, I guess the question is, what encouraged you, or what was the push factor for you to become an employment lawyer? What was the reason for you to take on the position that you have now? And I guess the follow-up question to that is, comparing it from now to maybe like 2019, what are some big things that you've noticed in regards to the beginning stage of employment with candidates? May I please start with you, Busayo?
Sure. For me, I'd say, so in my undergrad, I did human resources. So I had an interest in employment stemming from there. But when I went to law school, I wanted to keep an open mind about what area. So I was open to maybe doing something else. So through process of elimination of trying other areas, I kind of saw that probably wasn't going to work for me. And also, I kind of went back to a situation that happened to me before I actually applied to law school, and thought about how I felt then and how could I apply that to helping people in my practice. So my first job out of undergrad, that was actually in human resources. I was very excited to start it. It was at a jewelry store, and they had a process where they wanted people to work Saturdays. They said everybody that works here works on Saturdays, and then you take off a different day during the week. And I, at that time, was heavily involved in my church, and on Saturdays, I had commitments to the church. And so I had, it was my first week, maybe a couple days in, and they let me know about like the schedule. And I said, oh, well, I'm very committed at my church, and Saturdays I have commitments. Would it be okay if on some Saturdays that I left a little bit early, so that way I'm still able to help out with those commitments with the church? And I noticed my manager's face change when I said that. And she said, I'll get back to you. And it wasn't even the next day. I think probably that morning I got called in and they said, oh, we decided to go in a different direction and we're going to end your employment. I was devastated. It was the first job I had ever been let go from. And also my first HR job out of school. So I was so excited about it. And I remember that feeling of helplessness that I had then. I didn't know about any of my rights. I didn't talk to anyone, like I didn't talk to a professional lawyer. I didn't pursue anything in terms of like a potential human rights case or anything. I just kind of left it and I moved on to what's the next thing I'm going to do in my life. So I kind of went back to that situation and thought, it'd be really great as a way to honor the old me if I could just apply the knowledge I have now to every situation going forward and helping my clients. So I think for me, that's one story that I go back to remind myself why I'm doing employment law, why I like this area. It's a way to help people, as well as be in an area of law that is dynamic and changing, right? So a lot of times the law kind of stays the same, but in employment, every now and then we get some movement and different cases that kind of shift the way we interpret things. And so it's an area that I find a lot of, I guess, interest in terms of being able to adapt to the law and the way it's changing, but also a way to really connect with people and help them in a very vulnerable situation that they're experiencing.
That's really incredible. First of all, I'm really distraught that they would let you off the moment that you mentioned, other priorities, religious priorities for that matter, actually. That's really heartbreaking. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. But
Thank you. I'm healed from that now. So
yes, good.
I'm not torn up about it anymore, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. It's just hearing that, it's like you never think that would be a reason. For me personally, I would never think that's a reason to that isn't a reason. I personally don't think it's a reason to let someone go, but not everyone thinks that way. And look at you now. You are an established employment lawyer, here to share your knowledge, and I can personally say that I'm glad that you are healed from it and that you are doing better things. So forget them, to be candid. How about you, Danielle? What made you want to become an employment lawyer?
I think on the onset through undergrad, even prior to undergrad, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but as a child of immigrant parents who don't know the system, I think I had so many barriers that I could not overcome. I had already put myself through undergrad, working a full-time job. Parents gave moral support, but pretty much that's all they could give at that time. And I just thought that law school was a behemoth. I didn't know the process. I didn't know what to do. And I just kind of gave up and went into working at the bank, thinking, I've graduated, at least it's better than my retail job. Subsequently, after that, I did an HR certificate at Ryerson, and then I really started to make moves in terms of what I wanted to do. The doors of HR didn't open as readily as I wanted them to, and I did have some friends, women of color, who were in law school at the time. So for me, it was a circle back to what I think I really wanted to do. I went back to law school as a mature student at the age of 30. So I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I knew this was what I wanted to proceed with. And I knew specifically I wanted to pursue employment law, not just because of the nature of some of the learning I did through undergrad and my HR certificate, but because my mother had been terminated. I saw the stress that she went through and the process she went through with her lawyers and coming to a settlement, and seeing my father demoted and not advocating for himself and not really knowing if that was even wrong. And looking back at it now, I'm like, darn, I wish I was a lawyer at the time that this happened to my dad. But just those personal experiences, seeing people at those vulnerable situations, as Busayo said, and being able to really help people. And I think I have an empathetic nature, and I really do care about my clients, so I want to get the best result for them. And I think that matched with my, being a lawyer is really helpful to my clients in navigating such tumultuous times. So for me, I get that sense of purpose by being an employment lawyer in such a ever-changing field.
Excellent. Sorry to hear about what happened to your parents. And I find it's always a common story hearing from, with people of color, they're being taken advantage of, or they're not aware of, like we said earlier, they're not aware of, their rights, their employment rights until, it's late, it's a year later, or it's 6 months later, et cetera, or until you get fired. You don't realize that, no, you were fired for no reason. This is not a legal reason why you should have been demoted or why you should have been laid off, et cetera. So, and I do agree, it's always funny when the things that now you wish you had learned then, and maybe the situation would have been different. It would have been different. But I do like that you mentioned your passion for helping others, and to, let them see that, you're there for them. And it's not just, you take away that misconception that people have with lawyers, that they're just in for themselves and they just want the quickest, not the quickest, but the most beneficial beneficial case to deal with. You take that away, and I appreciate all of you do actually. Not just Danielle, but all of you do are very honest, and I can tell that you all care about your clients and I trust me, I did my background on y'all, and that you care about your clients and you care about them winning and you care about them succeeding in the job industry. So I just want to give my respect off to each one of you. A little side note, Osaro, with you as well. What made you want to, being all the way in BC, but it's okay. What made you wanted to be an employment lawyer as well as work for a Samfiru?
Yeah, sure. So I did a crim undergrad, and I did that with a view to becoming a police officer. A couple years into it, I decided that's not what I wanted to do. And so I kind of just took a bunch of courses, but the two that stuck with me was a human rights course. And then I took a business law course, which, covered like a range of issues, but a range of legal topics. But my professor was an employment lawyer, and she kind of like really inspired me. And honestly, I think when I got to law school, I kind of got swept up in, the whole corporate thing. And by the time I had articled, which was just last year, I realized that like I kind of got away from like, why I actually came to law school and what was important to me. And I think the pandemic also like contributed to like me like really slowing down and reflecting as to like what I actually wanted, what mattered to me. And so for me, like employment law, it's a like a values forward practice. Like I'm very people oriented. I like the idea of that it is civil law, it's business, but it's also personalized, and yeah, and the idea, like Danielle said, that I get to like help people every day is really what keeps me going and what I enjoy most about the practice. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Of course, people's person, always putting others before yourself. Absolutely. And that's I believe a key factor when being of a public service and helping other people is, your main focus is putting their needs above yours. And I think when clients can see that, I think that what draws them in. It certainly will draw me in for sure, knowing that the person who I'm seeking for advice, legal advice, is not putting themselves or the employer on top of what I'm going through, on top of my needs. So I think that's very important, and I appreciate that is your focus as well. And then finally for you, Puneet.
Well, it's a good question. I went to law school around, I was around 29. And after graduating, I wasn't sure what kind of law I wanted to practice. I thought at the time, a little bit of everything was the best. So a general practitioner was probably, definitely focusing on a certain area is definitely better, but I articled at a general practice. So I got to do a lot of different areas of law, real estate. There was some family law, which right away I knew I did not like whatsoever. And, some corporate commercial law as well, and employment law. And my first two employment law files, and this was, I think I just finished articling, and they were both one right after another, walk-ins to the door of the small firm. They're both racialized individuals. Both were involved in an incident at work, and the non-racialized individual got to keep their job, and the racialized individual was terminated. This happened twice in a row. And I ended up getting great settlements for both of those clients. And the clients, they didn't even care about the money at the end. They were just so kind of thankful that, they were involved, in the situation with their employer. And really, you spend more time with your colleagues and your family a lot of times, right? And when that relationship breaks, it's a huge change in your life. And just seeing that from the clients and how rewarding that was for me, it just kind of made me shift gears to focus on employment law. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And there's also, I'm just going to add that it's also financially rewarding. and has been so during the pandemic. I think it's the best time to be an employment lawyer. Let's be real here, and that's part of it as well. But it just I find it extremely rewarding, where it's almost always your client is so appreciative of what you do, beyond dollars and cents, for how you have made them whole, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then they also learn from you as well. They learn a lot of things that they can take on, the next time they want to seek they want to seek a job in a different job industry, in a different sector. They apply the knowledge that you've given them. They apply what they've learned from you, and they apply the previous situation that they dealt with you as a client, into a next job, so they know better. Or not even so much they know better, they just know how to proceed henceforth, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I definitely find that all of the clients are better prepared going forward, and sometimes these files take a long time, and when you first speak to the client, they're upset, and sort of have lost their confidence almost, and most of the times it's a termination, right? And by the time the file is resolved, and you see the client at the end, and they're a different person, they're filled with confidence, and they're better prepared for the next challenge in their life, and it's awesome to see.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you all for sharing your stories and your background as to why you chose to take on the role of being an employment lawyer. We definitely appreciate your service for sure when it's needed. My last question, we have one last question here. This is for all of you. So it says, having said all you said, what are the 2 ways you will advise candidates to know their rights and protect their rights during the hiring process? I guess we'll start again with you, Busayo. What are 2 important ways that you could advise candidates to know about their rights and protect their rights during the hiring process?
I'd probably say, just to kind of, I guess, make it simplified and easier to remember, is if you're going through the process and something doesn't feel right about it, it's not sitting right with you. Usually, like as a racialized person, going through, like moving through society, in this society specifically, where we're we're the non-majority, you often can feel the difference almost palpably, even though it's not, it could be subtle, or it's not very outward. There's, I guess, a bit of a shared experience that we kind of go through, and kind of being in a space and kind of noticing those things that perhaps non-racialized people might not notice. And so I'd say that's your, tap into that spidey sense, essentially, right? So if things don't feel right, that's your starting point, of maybe checking in to ask questions, right? So if something's happening during a hiring process that is perhaps you're being treated differently because of a personal attribute, your race, or perhaps you think it's things changed all of a sudden when you spoke to them versus when it was just on paper. So just tapping into that innate feeling. And then the second thing I'd say is, if you do feel something is not right, then ask questions, right? So if you go through an interview process and things don't work out, reach out afterward and ask the interviewer for feedback, right? So ask, hey, I just wanted to get some feedback on on the interview process that I can apply going forward, and see what they say, right? Some of the things that they might say might just be things you can use to improve going forward. And if they're saying something that actually doesn't make much sense, then perhaps it might support some of those feelings that you were having that something wasn't sitting right. I think it's a practice to use regardless in any interview process you go through, because you can learn a lot from when it doesn't go well, just as much as when it does go well, and you get the job. So I'd say just, trusting your gut instincts is one. If you feel that something isn't right, and that's your first instinct, to reach out and get some support, perhaps talking over the situation with a lawyer. Of course, we're always going to default to talk to a lawyer as lawyers here. And then second, ask questions, ask for feedback.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. Osaro, how about you? What would be I guess, one or two ways that you would advise candidates?
Yeah, I mean, Busayo gave us a lot of ways. I don't know if I come with a different way. I think that the most important thing is to, yeah, kind of like follow your gut, but also slow things down when you can. I think the contract point we brought up about, them, an employer just telling you like just to sign this like when you are, of course that's after you're hired, but like when you are offered a position, but also like inform yourself. Like don't be afraid to maybe not talk to a lawyer, but even like just talk to reach out to those organizations. And so like if you're going through an interview and something feels off or you anticipate an issue, like don't like feel free, or yeah, be proactive and like reach out to those organizations or to a lawyer if possible, and try to get some information. Yeah, those would be like my two biggest ways.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Sorry, I know you have to go, but thank you so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate you, the opportunity and your participation in our Know Your Employment Rights conference. Thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Khadija, and yeah, thank you the other panelists and everybody for tuning in. Really enjoyed being a part of this, and yeah, all the best, everyone.
Thank you so much, Osaro.
Yeah.
I guess last two would be Puneet. What's one important advice you would give to candidates in regards to their rights?
I think it's been covered very well, but I'll add, be confident. I think we touched on this in the beginning. Busayo maybe mentioned it. Be your authentic self. And also be confident. If an employer wants to give you a job, it's because they think you're talented and that you can fulfill that role. And you need to go into the job thinking that. Don't think they're trying to do you a favor. You're doing them a favor by bringing your talents to that organization. And I think with that mindset, you'll automatically, protect your own rights. When you look at yourself as someone who deserves to be here for their talents, I think that just changing that outlook or mindset will help you. When something fishy is going on or your employer is doing something they shouldn't be doing, you'll have that confidence to hopefully just maybe nip it in the bud, as they say, right there. And I think that's the most important thing especially for racialized candidates. I see a lack of either confidence or a belief that, hey, someone's doing me a favor by giving me this job. You can't look at it that way. And changing that mindset is very important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then finally, Danielle, for you, what is an important, if it's not said already, what's an important piece of advice?
Everyone pretty much covered everything. I would just also say, like, if you feel like a question is uncomfortable, if they're asking about your age, your ethnicity, disability, things that inherently we all kind of know things that shouldn't be asked. Maybe you can do a little bit of research just on what are your rights under the code and kind of know what questions an employer shouldn't really be asking you in an interview or even thereafter. And maybe just feel comfortable with just saying, I'm not comfortable answering that question, right? And being confident in that, and being confident in, as Puneet said, talking about the skills that you have and highlighting those things, because they should be hiring you because you are the best candidate, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Busayo, Danielle, Puneet, and if Osaro was here too, thank you so much. This has been a very informative, interesting, and engaging conversation. I'm now seeing where it is now officially 2:00. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you all for being a part of this panel discussion. Excuse me. I certainly have learned a lot. I've learned a lot from each of you and a lot of things that I didn't know myself. It was very insightful. I really do appreciate the time that you've taken to be with me and to join us on our Know Your Employment Rights Conference, the Attraction Edition. I would also like to thank everyone in attendance and for joining us here today on Know Your Employment Rights. Just a quick announcement for everyone, for those who are here, we do have another session next week, next Thursday, with a different set of panelists where we will be discussing, it will be a panel discussion on employment and human rights during the job recruitment process, addressing issues during job interviews, and then offering solutions to remove barriers to employment for racialized individuals. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us here today, and I hope to see you all next week, Thursday, January 20th, from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you everyone so much. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
You
Yep.
too.
Thanks for
Bye.
having us.
Of course,
for
take
having
care.
us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.